Hello, I am Ava Claire,
And I'm Hakeem Bennett.
and we are both interns with Sawyerville this summer. We are so excited for this opportunity to bring together this amazing group of panelists. The Sawyerville team wants to help to make this moment a movement. We hope that as individuals watch this video, conversations begin within their own spheres of influence, and we are moved to action.
Before we begin, I want to share with you that we have asked our panelists to come into a space with respect for one another, that they share and listen, to be open-minded panelists, to share their own personal experiences, and that they have a statistic, it will be from a credible source. We have invited each of our panelists into a brave space.
Together, we will create a brave space, because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in a real world, we all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work it out side by side. So for our discussion today, we will have this group of panelists answering questions submitted by different individuals in the Sawyerville community. Throughout the summer, we have had a series of panel discussions with different panelists that have included high school staff, Sawyerville staff, and clergy. We invite you to check out Sawyerville's website and go see those.
All right, so the first discussion question we have, what is your name? What is your profession?
Okay, I'll go ahead and go first. I'm Adam Heggie. I am an associate professor of public health, and I direct the undergraduate public health program at Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina.
I am Shakita Jones, and I am an assistant clinical professor at Auburn University and in the sociology, anthropology, and social work department. And I have been a social worker for over 20 years.
My name is Stonewarthier King. I go by Star. I work at Greensboro Elementary under the Hale County Board of Education. I've been there for 10 years, and I work with special needs.
Our next question is, how have you seen race relations change over your lifetime, for worse or for better?
I'll go ahead and share my experiences and perspectives. I'll start with good. I always like to start with good. I think when I think about my life, nearly 40 years on this earth, and being a United States citizen, some good things I've seen are the movements going on right now. And, you know, I'm excited about the current generation, the current young people coming up. I have an 11-year-old daughter who is a white female, already recognizes her privilege, which growing up when I was 11 years old, I didn't even know what was going on in the world. I didn't even think about these things. So I am excited about her engagement and how younger folks are engaged. And so I get really excited about that. I think the things that I still think are going on from my experience, being here in North Carolina and in a lot of communities, there was a lot of excitement over the last 8 to 10 years with the election of Barack Obama to the presidency. But I could kind of, in being in the South and being in the community that I am, I could see a lot of racial tension going on there. I could see a lot of the community that I grew up in, which is predominantly white. And I could see, I would hear things and knew that this was kind of festering beneath the surface. And, you know, I saw and heard a lot of things that I just really bothered me. So I knew that things were not going to be solved by electing a Black president. I think that's when I first realized that, oh, this is much bigger than that, I guess. You know, so I think we made a lot of good progress, but there's still a lot of work still to do, and we need to keep at it.
Okay, so I was thinking about this question, and one of the things that I thought about is thinking about generation, because I teach history. That's one of the things that I teach at Auburn University in the social work department. I teach social welfare history. So I often, when I teach these classes, I think about my parents' generation, which was the generation that the civil rights legislation was passed. And then I think about when I was born 10 years after that. So when I think about things like this, I think about the educational system and what I was going through this period of time. So I think about during the time that I was in school in the 80s and the 90s. This is when you saw the full vision of integration. So when I think about what my experiences were in school, because as we know in the national news, we have a lot of conversation about changing the names of some of these high schools. And I went to Robert E. Lee High School. So with all this stuff that's coming up, and the time that I went there was majority white. So what's interesting is that a lot of my classmates we have a Facebook feed that we communicate. And a lot of them, if they know me personally or connected to me on Facebook, they've been inboxing me saying, I never thought about what it was like for you to go into that school named Robert E. Lee. You know, so, but when I think about what our relationships were back then, things were still very segregated. Like we had like Black homecoming attendance, white homecoming attendance. You know, everything was still very segregated and divided. So when I think about what my experiences were doing school, it's like now with everything that's going on, I'm having like everybody's awakening to what our experiences really were. You know, even though it seemed like we were friends and we hung out, we were still very, very separate and divided. And so when I think about just that experience and then the people who were teaching us, when I look back now, we had the teachers in that school system, some of the ones fought for and against the rights of the children that they were educating. So when I think back now, I think that something that somebody said, oh, that could have been a little bit racist, or, you know, something like that. So it has really, when I think about where I have been personally and where we are now, I definitely see the difference in just the dialogue, the intentionality. Now, having said that, growing up, I don't think that I had a lot of the racial issues, but I do want to say it's demographics, because I was talking to my husband, who's only 3 years older than me, and he grew up in Birmingham, and he said when he was in high school, there was a race riot. So that's only a 3-year difference. So I was like, okay, so something else was popping off in Birmingham when something wasn't happening in Montgomery, you know? So it's a difference in demographics on how people experience certain things. So when I think about where we are now, and I think about just what my experiences were, I really do think that things are a lot worse now for me. And I feel like just the level of the things that are just in the open were just not there when I was younger, or I can say I was not paying attention to. But these kids, my son is 16 years old, they are paying attention. they are aware because everything is just really out there, opposed to when I was in the 80s and 90s growing up, and a lot of those things being out there. And lastly, I do want to say, I think my parents did protect us from a lot of things and did not discuss a lot of things, or may not have been aware of a lot of things. But I am not my parents. I shared this information with my son. I talked to him about it. I help him to understand behaviors and the things that people say around him, so he can be able to understand who's on his team and who's not.
Okay, just to touch base on what she said, I had the same thing in mind too about the segregation, because when I was in high school, we had it was like 4 different schools in Hill County. We had Sunshine Mountain, Greensboro West, Greensboro East, and at the West campus was Greensboro High School West. They had majority of white there, but they also had blacks. And then with the homecoming as well, they had a black court, and then they had a white court. They did football. And up on the hill, what we call Greensboro East, we did basketball. So the West Campus, they had their homecoming, and also Greensboro East had their basketball homecoming. But to touch base on that, it was segregated. But when we did combine, most of the white students, they went to Marvel. We didn't have any students that would come over to the Greensboro East because they said that it was a bad school. They didn't want their children to come over there because they said so much was happening. It's an open campus. Anybody can walk in and do whatever they want to do. And then also, with that, I say now it's getting better, but we still have that segregation some, but not as much. We still have it. But we're working on the issue to bring everybody together on one accord. And I think that since we start having Storyville Day Camp, that has helped a whole lot. That has helped a whole lot. And I just appreciate it because now people getting the understanding of there's no difference in the skin color. I mean, it's a difference in the skin color, but we all bleed the same. We all have the same heartbeat. So, I mean, to come on one accord, everybody has to work towards it. We can't be against one another. We have to come together as one to make everything work. So.
All right, so our next question is, what is your earliest memory of microaggression? And microaggression is defined as the term for use for brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional. They communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative prejudice, slights, and insults toward any group, particularly from their marginalized groups. So we're going to start with Adam, please.
Okay. I was reflecting on this as I was thinking about it, and I've been in a lot of discussions lately here in North Carolina around these topics, and it's sad for me to say, but I started to hear bad things at a young age. Growing up in the community I did, predominantly white, having parents that grew up through the civil rights debate and issues and all of those kind of things going on, there was still a lot of tension there. And so, and my grandparents, I can reflect on hearing a lot of things now when I reflect on it, thinking about things that were said and things that were done. So I'll just be the first to admit I've been reflecting a lot on that lately and thinking about that to where I am today, and thinking about, I can't go back and change those things, unfortunately, but I can be a voice for the future and with my daughter and the younger generation, sharing my experience, not being afraid to share where I came from, the things I did to grow and learn more and things that I still need to do. So I think, going back to that early age, I was witness to a lot of things that were not good.
Okay, I got a little movement in the back, so y'all gonna have to excuse me. Okay, so when I was thinking about this question of microaggressions, I had to think about, I thought in my home environment first. So there were some things that were said in my home environment at the time that I think were very as a protective measure. So like my parents grew up through the civil rights movement. When I think about my grandparents, a lot of them did not have rights or different things like that. So there were certain things that we were told, especially as Black families, that I can consider microaggressions or things that were harmful. So when I think about that, I could think about just being in my home environment and hearing those things. And if we're going to be honest about it, a lot of us have heard a lot of these things at home in our environment. I think a lot of times for African Americans, these things were protective things. And then there were some things as I got older that I had to be able to unlearn. So I would say that first in my home environment, and then when I started going into educational environments, that's when I started really, really, really looking at it and noticing a lot of those things.
Okay. Like they said, for me, I was thinking a lot about this question as well. And what I got out of it is it's based on your health. It also have a lot to do with behavior. Um, and with this, like within the school system that I work in, you can have people that's going around saying, "Hey, what's up, nigga?" Just like that. And the kids be like, "Why would you want to call me a nigger?" But if it's out of another race and they say, "Hey, nigga, what you doing?" Oh, it's a big problem. But when Black on Black do it, it's okay. And then another thing is a lot of people dealing with a lot of stress when they do this, like on job application and stuff like that. If you're Black, 9 times out of 10 in a big company, you will not get that job because of your race. And you can have the skill qualification that it takes to get that job, but they will overlook you and get somebody else from another race to do it. I don't care how long you've been on that job. You can be on that job 10 to 15 years. You have more experience than the person that they're going to bring in. But yet and still, they're not going to elevate you up to that next level because of the color of your skin. And that can cause health issues too, because that's bringing on stress. And when you are stressed like that, it have different effects. And it affects the personality of the person. And it also going down into your health problem. It's just a lot to that. Microaggressive, it have a lot of meanings to it. In order to understand it, I guess you just have to live in. It happened everywhere because it's happening in Hale County, it happened in Tuscaloosa. It's just everywhere. So, with that being said, we just have to go with the flow. Just do what we got to do in order to survive.
Thank y'all for sharing. Our next question is, what do race relations look like in your profession, and what have you done to address this issue?
I'll go ahead. So I'm in public health, and as a professional group, we are fairly progressive. We are very much, everything that we do comes from a social justice, health equity lens. The way that we communicate, the way that we act, all of those kind of things kind of come from that framework. And a lot of our work is focused around racial equity, racial justice. So, you know, on that side of things, you know, there's a lot of progress going on, a lot more work to be done. I've been really excited in recent weeks to see many cities around the country, rightly so, identifying racism as a public health issue, because we've been saying that for years in the field of public health, that race is a central issue to many of our health disparities and inequities, social inequities, and that if we're going to solve the problems, we've got to address the root issue, which is systemic racism, all the multiple levels that racism exists. So as a field, I'm really proud of public health. There's a lot more that we can always be doing. So, I'm excited about being a part of the field. In my day-to-day work, I guess, as a professor, I'm in a university that is still predominantly, overwhelmingly white. And so we have a lot of issues at the university level that we're trying to address and trying to do. And some things rightly so, some things probably not approaching it the way it should be done. So that's always a challenge. What I can say is public health, being the field that we are, our department and program is a leader on our campus along with social work. So I'm glad to be here with fellow social workers, you know, and us kind of taking the lead on things, us tending to be the more diverse groups on a white campus. So, you know, we kind of play that role, hopefully, in engaging in the difficult conversations, helping to lead the movements, and trying to find ways to do that. I will say that, you know, this fall on our college and university campuses is going to look much different. So we've got to, you know, reimagine what that can look like in the current, you know, kind of situations we're in. But you know, my goal as program director for public health is to really engage in it, to use my platform and my privilege to continue things on our campus and in our local community. And, you know, I've been speaking a lot with people, my colleagues and stuff lately. I think it's a good opportunity for us, even in the midst of this craziness, to heed John Lewis's words about creating a little good trouble that needs to happen. And so I'm going to really challenge our students and faculty in doing that in our field and on our campus and in the local community.
Yeah, Adam, good trouble is always good. And that's what I do in my community. I create good trouble. And I actually last year did have a chance to meet John Lewis and in the space where I do community work. So part of what I do, because I've adjunct at Auburn for about 3 years. So in the fall, I will be full-time. So I actually will be starting a full-time position as assistant clinical professor in the social work department. But I have a nonprofit organization that works with people living with HIV and AIDS. So I'm all about public health. My 20-year career has been HIV and health care social work. So I do understand the inequities as it relates to race and sick people living in communities. But I do a couple of other things outside of Auburn. One of the things that I do racial healing work, and it's with a collective of women called the Radical Optimist. And what we have been doing over the past 2 years is we've been working with organizations that have been having issues with diversity and inclusion. It's mainly nonprofit organizations, and we have been coming together. They've been visiting the Legacy Museum in Montgomery. I don't know if you guys have been there, but I do take my students there as well. But it's the museum. The content is about from slavery to mass incarceration. So organizations have been, one big funder they've been funding organizations, nonprofit organizations, to come to Montgomery to visit that museum and go through that process. And part of what my company does is we help them discuss their experiences and how they can go back to their jobs to serve people more equitably, as well as treat each other with respect and include people of color within their organizations. So that's one of the things that I've been doing as a social worker to be able to help with the racial issues that are going on. The other thing that I've been doing in Montgomery, as I said before, I'm a native of Montgomery. So it's a building called Crest on Dexter, and I've been holding community conversations there. And many of those community conversations are directly linked to the Alabama Shakespeare Festival. And what they are a theater group that puts on plays. So some of the plays under their new leadership and guidance have been primarily focused on a lot of the issues, our social issues. So issues like school to prison pipeline, civil rights, and just all different issues. So they'll do a play, and then we would bring the community together, and we would discuss the issues related to it. One of the biggest ones that we've had was when they did a play about the 4 little girls who were killed in the Birmingham bombing. And we had on my panel, because I'm the facilitator of those conversations, we had Terry Sewell, who is our congresswoman. We had her to come in and be a panelist. We had a woman who was a youth organizer during the civil rights movement. We had one of the sisters of one of the little girls who was killed in the bombing. And then we also had one of the students who acted in the play, because not only would this theater partner with Crest on Dexter for this conversation, they partnered with the school system and took students from Montgomery Public School system to act out the entire play. And it was amazing. It got a lot of good reviews, and they actually took that theater group to DC to perform in front of the Black Caucus last year. It was a really big deal. So, but with that conversation, the 4 little girls conversations, what I did is I spoke especially with the sister of one of the little girls who was killed in the bombing. I always do a pre-conversation with them, but because I like to highlight things that are very important, because the goal of these conversations, which are very mixed and diverse, is to allow people normal human empathy. So one of the things I discussed with her is that she wasn't even born when her sister died. Her mom had fertility issues, and her sister was the only child. And when her sister died in that bombing, her mama didn't know if she was going to be able to have any other children. People didn't know that. But, I could hear the gasp of the women in the room, white women, Black women, making that connection of, oh my God, this woman lost her only child, and she tried very hard to get, and was lost, due to hate, right? So, once all of that came out, and the blessing is that she was conceived a year after the bombing. So she was, she is their miracle child, their second miracle child. So, but what we did is we were able to hold a conversation that was talking about race, but we were also talking about human issues and issues that people deal with, on just whether they're Black, white, Latina, whatever, issues that people deal with. We were able to not only lift the veil of race and race issues, but we were able to say, hey, you know, this is a connection that we all have as human beings and as people. You know, this is something that any of us can go through. This is something that happened that shouldn't happen because of someone's race. So that's just an example of some of the stuff that I've done. You can always go on the Alabama Shakespeare website, and they have those conversations up there in their community section, to just be able to look at some of the issues that we tackle in the community, so we can understand, you know, gently and lovingly and empathetically, how we are more alike than we are different. So that's just a few of the things I do. And then, you know, starting full time at Auburn, I know that since I've been there as a minority professor, many of the students have been excited to have me there to offer them knowledge in the classroom. And I think and I say offer because it's a partnership. I'm offering them something, and then they have to be willing to receive it. So I always look at it as a partnership in the classroom. I am the instructor. I'm the provider of information, but it's definitely a partnership because we're in this together. So as I'm in the classroom, you know, students often engage with me well because that's my approach. That's my approach to learning. And I'm exposing them to information. I'm exposing them to the facts. And I'm also challenging them to think about how they've been raised, some of these things that they have been taught, and to unlearn some things. So when I take the students to the Legacy Museum, because my students get that experience as well, I usually take them around Thanksgiving, you know, because I know everybody's going to be going home and they're going to be talking. But I just don't just send them off, you know, with this information. I also give them tools how to communicate with their families, because majority of my students are white. I don't have many minority students at all. So when I take them to the museum, we debrief the process, what they think. Many of them have said, I need to go talk to grandmama. I need to go talk to mama. I need to ask where they stood on this issue. So I give them a sheet called Holiday Connecting Conversations. so they can talk to their families about these issues in a way where people don't feel threatened or challenged or attacked about the things that their ideology and the things that they believe. So I do believe, as a social worker, as we tackle these issues, as we work on these issues, we have to help people. We have to give them the tools on how to engage in these conversations, because the main thing for me is that the conversations keep going, that we don't shut people down. We don't that people don't feel like they can't share, or they feel hurt and shame. It's a vulnerable process, especially when we live in a country that has not done a truth and reconciliation. We have not told the truth about history in this country. And so I am on a one-woman mission, probably, to tell people about the truth, because I believe if you allow people to have information and allow them to decide, instead of telling them, instead of saying, this is how you should think, this is how you should feel, this is what this is, it can be totally different. So what we have to do as a country, as educators, as professionals, we got to tell the truth about the information and allow people to make the decision of how they're going to use it. That's all I got to say right now.
Okay. With me, well, I'm not into all the social work and stuff like that, but with my school, when we have in-service, we have someone to come in and they talk about the different racism and all that And then we have to go back into the classroom and we have to talk to our students about it to get them on the same page that we learn. It's not a 1 day or a 1 week lesson that we have to teach on it. We have to continue and continue to go over it because we want everybody to be on the same page. We want everybody to like everybody, not just because this person right here, okay, she's white, she don't want to be my friend. We try not to teach that because we want to be everybody's friend. So with that being said, we always try to include even, well, at the school that I'm at, we only have like maybe 4% of white. The rest of them is Black, maybe one Latino. But we try to teach everybody the same thing. We want everybody to come together as one. So when something's not working, we always have to go back to a workshop to get more information. And then we have to bring that information back to the school. And then we'll have like a meeting after school, and we have to teach that whatever we learned within that program, we have to teach it to the rest of the teacher. And they have to go back into their classroom and they have to implement it to their students. So once they do that, if it's something not working, they have to come up with a strategy that they think would work. And we had to put that together and see what's the next step that we need to take. But with the racism, it's hard. It's gonna take progress. It's gonna take time. But I think through it all, we're gonna get past it. We're gonna get past it because we're gonna be on one accord. But it's gonna take time. It's gonna take process.
Okay, how do you think we're going to make this movement on a national scale or either a local community scale?
This one was a great question. Has me still thinking about, what can be done. I mean, I think right now we're seeing things on a national level, which is what gets me excited. But I also teach health policy and the intersection with public policy in general. And I think the national movement, the national momentum is important about raising awareness, raising knowledge has been mentioned. And I think it's going to take ultimately policy at all levels of government to address it. It's not going to just be federal policy. It's federal, state, and local policies need to happen. And so it's kind of was mentioned by Star, it gets frustrating because it takes time to see those things happen. I mean, I want it to happen yesterday, but it takes time. And so I think the importance of it is to keep things going. I think when a lot of things are going on, we have these like 2 to 4 week periods where people are really engaged and really into it, and then nothing changes really quickly, so they kind of lose interest, I guess. Not interest, but they just don't feel like it's making any good. So I think there's this need for us to be in it for the long haul. And I'm excited, as I mentioned earlier, with the younger generation and our role, Shakita and I, as educators, is to really provide that knowledge, but also to inspire our students and the younger generation to keep at it and us to be right there alongside them. So, kind of like I said, the national level is the important piece, but then, we've got to address the local community level issues, and there's a lot of communities around the United States. And so, and they all look a lot different and they all have their own different contexts. And so that makes it very challenging as well. But I am very hopeful, and I'm hoping things will take off. I know here in North Carolina, an exciting thing happened recently, a couple hours away in Asheville, North Carolina. You may have heard about it in national news. Asheville, North Carolina was, I think, the first city to declare that they're going to address reparations. And so there's going to be financial aspects, which has to be a part of this. We're not going to get anywhere without addressing that issue that I think is a major player. When we think about the historic wealth inequalities and all of those kind of things, I think are important. So I'm excited. I think with this being a group that I know has roots in faith, I think faith plays a large role in it. I think, when you think about historically, I think the church plays a large role. I come from a family of faith leaders. My brother is an Episcopal priest, and my wife is an ordained United Methodist pastor. And so both of them use their faith to try to stir up that good trouble and to try to really move things forward. So I think faith plays a large role. I think faith has done a lot of bad things, unfortunately. I think throughout our history, the church has been on the right side of things, but it's been on the wrong side of things in a lot of ways. So I think the church can play a large role in this, in doing the right things, which calls on clergy to oftentimes be uncomfortable and all those kind of things, which can be challenging. So I think there's a whole lot of things that can happen. I mentioned to Ann Mosley when she invited me to be on this, our church right now has several groups involved, and we are reading the book The Color of Compromise by Jamar Tigsby, who traces the historic role of the church in racism throughout the United States and the role that the church has played throughout our history and our need to address that the church has played a major role in a lot of the issues. And so knowledge, inspiration, all of those kind of things, but at the end of the day, it's policy and systems and justice that has to take place. So it's kind of all of the above at all levels.
Adam, I'm glad that you mentioned the church and the role that church has played in racism. And I think that is particularly interesting because when I think about the church, because I'm someone that grew up in the church, am I breaking up or am I okay? Okay. All right. So when I think about that, what always pops up into my mind is white Jesus. We see these pictures of Jesus in the many churches, and it's a white man with blue eyes and this long straight hair. And we understand that that's not the description of Jesus in the Bible. We understand demographically that Jesus couldn't look like that, But when I see that, I think about the white supremacy in even creating a white Jesus, So the church has a lot of work to do, And I think that the church is one of those places where we need to do the truth telling first. We need to start there because there are a lot of people who identify themselves as Christian, and they need to be able to know the truth from their faith leaders. And I think that there's been a lot of harm done with that. And even when I think about it, because I've done rural social work before, and when I go into, I've gone into African Americans' homes, and they'll have usually 3 pictures up: the white Jesus, JFK, and Martin Luther King, right? So those are the saviors. But I think it's a way. I think we need to be able to tell the truth on all levels. Now, getting to your question, should these things happen on a local or national level? I am so grassroots. One of the things I'm excited about teaching this fall, I got a new class, and I'm making it into a grassroots organizing class. I know somebody else was teaching it, and I was like, okay, yeah, that's cute, but this is what SBJ is gonna do, right? because local elections matter. When you start from the inside, you know, we talk about this on the physical side. There's some stuff that needs to happen on the inside for us to be able to function on the outside. When we start on the inside, the change happens on the outside. So even think about that on a physical level. So, you know, if you want to lose weight, it's got to be according to what you put on the inside of your body, right? So you got to work on what you're putting on the inside so you can manifest what everything you need on the outside, right? That's the same thing with policy and elections and all this other stuff. I was first started doing grassroots organizing. One of the things I looked at the numbers. In Alabama, more people were coming to vote for president than they were for governor or any other local elections. That's crazy. That's crazy to me. So we were looking at a whole larger system and not even thinking about the poverty, the issues on a local level. We were so caught up on who was running the country rather than who was running our state, who was managing our cities, who were doing things locally. So I think that if there's going to be any kind of change, that change has to start at home. We have to get people to understand the legislative process, in which I'm really concerned about what's going on with our schools now, because, you know, funding gets cut. If kids are not going to get access to a lot of different things, what's going to happen is that subjects are going to start getting cut. I know they're not going to cut reading. I know they're not going to cut math. Science, they may scale back, but we know social studies is gone. History may be gone. You know, these are subjects that they don't deem as important. So what we need to be able to understand is local elections matter. Grassroots stuff matters. And people need to be able to understand that and just the basics of the legislative process, how this works, how we get from here together to there. I always tell people, because laws and policy is hard. You know, that's what I do. Policy is hard. But I always tell people, if you think about this, if you need help, you get you a young doctor and an old lawyer, because medicine always changes and law never does. You know, so that's the concept. Once you start thinking about how long it takes to change policy, how long it takes to implement policy, how long it takes to even just go through the legislative process, when you help people to understand that early and you get them to buy in to the advocacy and the fight, that's how you train people to stay in there for the long haul. So I think it's about educating people on a local level on how this works, educating them in our school system about how this works. And I think, like I said before, you know, we've done a very, very, very poor job of educating people just on basic things as it relates to policy and change in how communities work.
So our next question is, what resources have you been reading lately regarding race? And this can be films or books or articles.
So I've been trying to read a lot more and view a lot more things. My wife and I intentionally, it's been a really good thing of being at home a lot more is really taking the time to spend time with our daughter and watch documentaries, movies with her, read and talk about the reading, those types of things. So some things that I've been watching, we've watched Selma several times. That always just gets me back to the heart of what the fight's about. Just Mercy, read the book and watched the movie. Brian Stevens is my hero. So trying to think what other movies we've watched. Some TED Talks that I like. I love TED Talks. If you've had me as a student, I love TED Talks. One that I always go back to is Dr. Kamara Jones. who has her TED Talk on the allegories of race. And I encourage you all to check that one out. It's really good. Dr. David Williams from Harvard has a really good TED Talk about the impact of race on health. That's really good. He's been in the news here lately talking about race and COVID-19 and some of those things happening. So trying to tune into the TED Talks, documentaries, movies, and then reading. Right now I'm in a couple different book studies, reading How to Be an Anti-Racist and keeping up with Dr. Kendi's work. He did a talk earlier this week that I was able to tune into and listen to. And then, as I mentioned earlier, my church is also reading, several of us are reading The Color of Compromise, which is a really good one that talks about the church and the church's role in all of this. Other than that, those have been the main things I've been reading and viewing, and then just trying to keep up day to day on what's going on. As a public health researcher, I love to follow the data and love to also mix that with stories and getting to hear stories from people that have different experiences from me. So much of my work research right now, my research focuses predominantly on social determinants of health, social inequalities, and health issues. And so mine transitioned a lot to COVID-19 when our university kind of shut down. That was where a lot of our research went to. So I've been following a lot of the racial disparities as it comes to COVID-19. And so I'm working on some of that research right now. So I'm getting a lot of reading through that and trying to keep up on things. And that's another piece that I've been involved with as well.
Well, I don't watch a lot of television. I just figure out because somebody had to help me do Hulu and Netflix. You know, even when I'm in the classroom, I'm trying to show something, you know, I read a lot. So some of the things I had to pull up my Audible because I like to multitask too. So I had to see what I've been listening to. So one of the things especially since COVID, I did read How to Be Anti-Racist by Kendi, Ibram Kendi, but also he has Stamped from the Beginning. That's a really good one. I did listen to that actually last summer. Another one of the things that's particularly interesting to me, because if you go through our educational system, a lot of African American history is left out. And then if you do get it, it's the basics of Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, you know, and then everybody was happy. So what I've been trying to do is, because so much of this history has been kept from us and from me, I have been on this really just journey of just trying to find out about other significant leaders, especially in other communities. So, and people in my profession. So one of the other books that I read, that I listened to, is the Underground Railroad recordings. So that was one that I've been listening to just so I can hear about the stories and experiences of people who escaped slavery, and just, you know, how they were trying to reunite families. Because another thing that I often hear in the Black community is about broken families and families that are not together, but you know, you have to really get down to the root of where this came from in the system and what families' experiences were like even during this period of time. Another thing that I was going to say, said I wasn't going to tell anybody, by James Cone. James Cone is a person that pretty much coined Black theology. And so one of the things, and he just died maybe like 2 years ago, but he was a minister and a teacher. And one of the things he thought about is, as he was going through theology school, he saw how Black people were not represented in religion and its theology. So he kind of took the lead on educating, especially his colleagues and his students, and on Black theology, and really getting to the history and getting down to the experience of tying in the African American experience to the Bible. So that's another person that I've been studying, that we just really don't talk about. And when I started looking into him, I was thinking, why aren't all Black churches talking about this guy? You know, so definitely him, and Black Titan. It was this is about A.G. Gaskin, who was a millionaire, a multimillionaire out of Birmingham, Alabama, and they have a lot of buildings and things named after him. And he was actually he came well. I'll let y'all look him up, A.G. Gaskin. He's good, but it's like he came from nothing and he became a millionaire. So it's still a lot of buildings and things named after him in Birmingham. And this is just one of the people that a lot of people don't talk about. He did a lot in building wealth in Black communities. And before he died, he sold off the shares of his company to his employees so they could continue to build wealth for very cheap. People thought that he was crazy. So that's another thing, because I've been interested in entrepreneurship in Black communities and building wealth in Black communities. I know I did see the story about reparations, and I do believe that that's a good thing, but at the same time, we have to help people to understand how to build wealth and how to not have to work for anybody. They have what they need to create businesses. One person can create a business, another person can. But it's also about helping people to understand those resources of how to create these things. Another one, white fragility. I do that in, just reading the work that with my racial healing work. That's a lot. It's a book that we often use, and there is a racial healing handbook that I'm probably going to introduce to one of my classes next semester. And let's see what else. Black Fortunes. This is a book that talks about first Black billionaires. And that's another thing that I thought that was very important, because when we usually think about Black communities and people in Black communities, we often talk about disparities and poverty, but a lot of times people don't understand that there was wealth in the communities as well. So we need to talk about the people who were wealthy in the communities, how they got their wealth, and help people to also understand how they can build that same wealth. So to me, it's about charting out a path so people can understand. And then plus, I got a 16-year-old son who wants to be an entrepreneur. And I was like, okay, baby, we got to figure this out, because mama's not going to fund your first venture that may fail, So, and then I'm thinking about, I'm not at home, so I don't really have my library. I read Ain't I a Woman? It's about Black feminism, because even when we look at the feminist movement, there were still racial issues in the feminist movement, and the difference is in how things were shared or talked about or advocated for, especially sometimes when they were seen as a racial issue. A lot of times white feminists would not want to support that. One of the main things that I can think about, this wasn't in the book, but I know from Shirley Chisholm's run for president, she was a member of National Organization of Women, and they did back her. She was a woman running for president, and she was also a part of this organization that did back her, because, could have been racial, could have been another feminist agenda. But it was, it's a way of, me learning these stories, me learning this information so I can share information with other people. So I think that that's the most important thing. I got a wealth of stuff that I've been reading all summer. And I have another one by that Mr. James Cone that I'm reading at home. And it was, it's about lynching, and lynching and the Bible. I can't think of the title of it, but that was one of the things that that this particular one focuses on. I'm sure you can just Google James Cone and lynching, and I think it's one of his last works. So I've just started reading that, because one of the things that I'm trying to figure out too is how you have this Christian belief, or just the system that that discounts other people, discounts life, so getting back to the to the big things, this big scheme of things, when when people say all lives matter, we know that in certain contexts that lives don't matter. So I'm trying to understand just the bigger context of how all this comes together, or how people started to think a certain kind of way. And I think that that's probably one of the hardest things about doing social work. Before we get mad about anything, we're fixing to try to figure out where this where it came from. I think that that's a gift, and that's the beauty of the work that we do, because we want to figure it out. I want to figure it out. I don't want to hate anybody. I don't want to dislike anybody. I don't want to judge anybody. So what I'm going to try to do is figure out, if I can engage with you directly, I am going to read about you. I'm going to try to research you. I'm going to try to understand everything I possibly can about you, so I can make sure that I'm not unfairly judging someone. I'm not unfairly causing any kind of harm or pain, or being prejudiced, or being hurtful, or doing anything to put someone's life in danger. I want to be able to, I don't think I would do that anyway, but I want to understand what the problem is. So it's just a few things that I've been reading. I haven't been watching anything much, especially news. Haven't been watching that. I picked up embroidery, and I just sit and listen to my books, and I just stitch.
All right, so now I ask that you join me in prayer for ending prayer. And I want to thank you guys for sharing as well today. So please bow your head for a word of prayer, please. So God of all humanity, we call us to bring out healing and wholeness for the whole world, for women and men of all races, cultures, and creeds. Help us to respond to a world that is growing and that await injustice and broken relationships. Remind us that differences are a gift, and interdependence is the strength of the same creative God. Strengthen us to resist forces that encourage polarization and competition rather than understanding and cooperation. We know that we reign is not built in justice or oppression, but it's transformation of hearts, new life, and just reordered life. Teach us forgiveness, oh God, bring us reconciliation. Give us hope for the future. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank y'all so much for doing this. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, all right. Thank you. And anytime, just give me a call.
Same here too.
All right. All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let it shine.